And there she is. She is the password queen. Yeah, why let them stay?
Carolyn Hyde Ross is the
Morning, Dan Herbert, Jason Van Dyke.
Tammy Ware for Jason.
Randy Group, Jason Dan.
Elizabeth Warren for Jason Van Dyke.
All right, we're gonna be beginning at 10 o'clock, hearing testimony, or a little bit quicker. My understanding is that the jury is, in the jury room right now. Is there anything that you need or any type of motions? Defense or prosecution?
After the state, no judge.
Okay. So maybe, let's let them, we'll get the jury settled in and we'll start, if they're ready, maybe around 9:30, so 20 some minutes. All right. Court's in recess then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Amina Thompson, will you please approach? Will you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
My name is Anita Thompson, Thompson. Administrative Assistant to the Chief Judge of the presiding Leroy Martin Jr. of the George Bacon Criminal Courts Building.
And you have an announcement concerning the overflow courtroom for next week, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The overflow courtroom for this case will be in courtroom 202.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that information.
Thank you.
All right, both sides ready? Madam Sheriff, will you please present the decorum order?
There's no talking while court's in session. If you want to talk, you need to step outside. Do not approach Mr. Jason Van Dyke for any reason whatsoever. Pursuant to Supreme Court rule on media coverage and per Giscon's decorum order, only Antonio Perez is allowed to take still photography in the courtroom. Absolutely no cell phone usage is allowed by anyone or any attorney in this courtroom unless you're here on the Jason Van Dyke case or with the media. In the interest of justice for the safety of individuals attending the proceedings of the Jason Van Dyke case and to preserve the dignity of the court and the integrity of the proceedings, the court orders the following. No cameras, video recorders, laptops, or other computers, cellular phones, personal digital assistants, or any other manual or electronic device capable of recording video, audio, or still images, or any device capable of recording video or audio representation or actual image or sound shall be permitted in the courtroom, with the exception of the credentialed media personnel. This can be changed without notice. 2, no bags, packages, briefcases, large coats, purses, pocketbooks, boxes, or any other container shall be brought into the trial courtroom. Attorneys involved in the Jason Van Dyke case and credentialed media personnel may be exempt from this rule. 3, no prejudicial or inflammatory logos, insignia, or paraphernalia of any kind shall be worn on any person or clothing while in the courtroom or on the 5th floor of this courthouse. Anyone failing to occupy his or her seat in the courtroom by at least 15 minutes before court is scheduled may forfeit the seat for the duration of the day's proceedings. 5, no members of the media or public shall be permitted beyond the railings separating the court gallery from the litigation area. 6, all members of the media shall display official trial media credentials at all times while in the courtroom. 7, no media or public observers shall be permitted to enter the courtroom while court is in session. Entry shall be only before the court convenes or during announced breaks in the proceedings. 8, no interviews shall be allowed in the trial courtroom or on the 5th floor of the courthouse at any time. 9, no disruptions, interferences, outbursts, public demonstration, loud or intrusive noises, or distractions shall be permitted in the trial courtroom or on the 5th floor of the courthouse at any time. Anyone who does not comply with this condition will be immediately removed from the courtroom or the 5th floor of the courthouse and may forfeit access for the duration of the case. 10, anyone who does not comply with the conditions of this order may forfeit access to the courtroom for the duration of the case. Violation of this order may result in the violator being held in contempt of court and or being subject to monetary sanctions pursuant to Illinois civil and criminal law.
Thank you very much. There'll just be a short recess, no more than about 2 minutes. Appreciate that. Would everybody please be seated? Our wonderful jurors in the outer portion of the jury box. If the monitor goes off with the one in front of you, could you please raise your hand and we'll get it hooked up real quick. All right. You know the questions, and so if there's any no and no is fine. And if there's any explanation, then certainly give me that. All right. Juror number 240.
No, no.
Juror number 241.
No.
Juror number 242.
No, no.
Juror number 243.
No, and no.
Juror number 244.
No, no.
Juror number 245.
No,
Juror number 246.
no, and no.
Juror number 247. Juror number 248. Juror number 249.
No, no.
Juror number 250.
No, and no.
Juror number 251. Juror number 252.
No, no.
Juror number 253.
No, and no.
Juror number 254.
No, no.
Juror number 255.
No, no.
And juror number 256. The outstanding work. You're great. All right. State, will you call your first witness of the day?
Judge, before I call the next witness, I'd like to move in 3 pieces of evidence.
Certainly. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. The first one is People's Exhibit number 8, which is a video. Mr. Messick was the witness that testified about People's Exhibit number 8.
And he laid the foundation yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any objections?
No.
Thank you. People's number 8 will have the identification mark stricken. It will be moved into evidence.
There's the second item is People's Exhibit 229. It was a large photo board. Witness Wojcik, that's W-O-J-C-I-K, who's the witness that laid the foundation for People's Exhibit 229. We moved that into evidence at this time as well.
Any objections?
No.
All right. People's number 229 will have the identification mark stricken. It will be moved into evidence.
And the final exhibit this morning, Judge, is People's Exhibit number 231. That was the body diagram that Dr. Arunkumar, that's A-R-U-N-K-U-M-A-R. Dr. Arunkumar laid the foundation for that and then testified that displayed the location of the gunshot entrance, exit, and points of recovery of bullets from that was the large diagram board.
Any objection, defense?
No objection.
People's number 231 will have the identification mark stricken. It will be moved into evidence.
Thank you, Judge. We're ready to call our next witness.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
State called Scott Patterson.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this honorable court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Thank you.
The chair is adjustable, the microphone's live, just relax, sit down, and then adjust the chair to the microphone and speak into the microphone. Everybody will be able to hear your testimony. Great. Thank you. Proceed, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Patterson, could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name?
My name is Scott Patterson, P-A-T-T-E-R-S-O-N.
And could you please explain to the jury your training and experience as it relates to firearms and ballistics?
For the past 7 years, I have been the supervisory special agent over what is called the FBI's Ballistic Research Facility. We function as an ammunition test facility, a weapons test facility, and a body armor test facility, principally for the FBI. We have approximately 13 other federal agencies that utilize us for testing. In addition to those core tests, we do a significant number of what I would describe as non-traditional experiments on things from bullet ricochets for a country in South America to the functional liability of weapon systems in the different hands of shooters in the FBI and other organizations. Armor helmet testing. If it relates to guns, ammo, and armor, we have likely in some way executed an experiment on that on behalf of our personnel.
And how many agents do you oversee?
Our team is 5 people. We have a 6th person who just arrived. The DEA is now part of our facility full time. So we have a total of 6 people in our facility.
And would it be fair to say that your purpose is to study firearms, bullets, and their effects?
Correct. Although I'm a special agent in the FBI, I don't have any other investigative responsibilities. My only responsibility is testing guns, ammo, and armor.
And you said that you've been the supervisory agent of this division for 7 years, correct?
Yeah, this spring will be 8, but 7 years at this time.
And could you estimate about how many rounds you and your team have fired over that period of time?
Generally, and I'll speak for just myself in this case, I've been in law enforcement for 23 years now. In all of the years prior to coming to the research facility, I never fired as many rounds as I have in my 7 years at the facility. We fire tens of thousands of rounds per year. As a group, we collectively probably fire conservatively 80,000 rounds each year.
And that's over 7 years that you've been there. So 80,000 per year times 7.
Yes, sir.
And specifically, do you study the effect of bullets hitting certain substances or surfaces?
We do. One of the core things that we do is we study bullets after they pass through intervening barriers. And those barriers can be anything from a wooden door, they can be auto glass, a windshield, they can be heavy clothing on people. As a result of that testing, we're able to select better bullets for FBI personnel to use. I think an important distinction between what we do and what our counterparts at the lab do is the lab will match bullets to guns, cartridge cases to guns. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to identify weapon systems, ammunition, and armor for our personnel to use during arrest operations. We are the before and during the shooting, where the other lab comes in and does the forensics afterwards. But as part of that, what we do study as well, and we started this 5 years ago, is ensuring that FBI projectiles that our personnel shoot into our adversaries perform in our adversaries the way that we expect them to. That means once the laboratory has done the analysis to say that bullet came out of that gun, then we're allowed access to those projectiles. And we look at those to make sure that they have done what we expect them to do as they transition through our human targets.
And so do you review instances where agents in the FBI shoot people?
We do. Not every single FBI shooting, the bullets come back to the lab, but for every one of them that do come back to the lab, we now go over and physically inspect those projectiles to determine whether they performed consistent with our expectations.
And have you also done experiments on bullets' effect on animals?
We have. We do a significant amount of live tissue testing to make sure that the bullets perform in living things the way we expect them to, correlated to in-house laboratory testing.
And have you also had experience in experimenting with bullets hitting hard floor surfaces?
We have. We've done shooting where we were skipping bullets off hard surfaces to watch how they ricochet onto a dirt berm behind that. We've done experiments with other hard surfaces such as armored vehicles to watch bullets impact those and skip off. So yes, we have done a number of those exercises.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert witness in court before?
I have in Arkansas and in a state court proceeding, and twice now in the federal district of Washington, D.C.
Okay, and that testimony had to do with bullets and their effects on things?
The one in Washington did, the one in Arkansas had to do with the functional liability of a pistol in a shooting.
And how many years of firearm experience do you have?
I have been a shooter essentially probably since I was 8 years old. From my teenage years on, I shot so much I couldn't afford to buy ammunition, so I had to make my own at home. So for many, many years, I have been involved with weapons and ammunition.
Judge, at this time, we would tender the expert and ask that he be qualified as an expert in firearms and ballistics.
All right, I find that Special Agent Scott Patterson is qualified to testify as an expert in the area of ammunition and ballistics.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Patterson, have you become involved in an investigation into the death of Laquan McDonald?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you made familiar what weapon was used in that shooting?
I was.
And what weapon is that?
It was a Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic pistol. I believe it was 5943 was the actual number of the gun.
Okay.
Model number.
Okay. And do all those numbers, the 5943, do those all mean something?
They do. And I'll try to explain that. The Smith & Wesson model numbering system is one of the more complex numbering systems. So the 59 denotes that it's a 9mm gun. The 4 denotes how the gun is fired, what it takes to press the trigger to fire the gun, and to a degree that it's a standard sized firearm. And then the last number can be anywhere, I think, between a 3 and a 7. And that denotes, quite frankly, just the finish, how it looks and what some of the materials are, whether it's all steel or it's an alloy. What's important is if you have a Smith & Wesson Model 59, 4, and then either 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, if you were to hold it and press the trigger on those, that effect would feel the same whether you have a 5943 or a 5947.
Or anywhere in between?
Or anywhere in between, correct. But those first 3 numbers are the most important.
And I think you said that it was a semi-automatic handgun?
It is a semi-automatic handgun.
What does that mean?
This particular pistol is a magazine-fed weapon, which means you will hold a magazine in your hand and you will load. In this case, it holds 15 rounds. And then you literally have, as we and other law enforcement personnel will wear that extra magazine on the body. There's also one of those magazines inserted in the weapon. The weapon has the chamber where the bullet is ready to be fired out of. So as you press the trigger, in this case on a 5943, every single time you press the trigger, the top of the gun comes to the back. What it's doing is it's taking that fired shell casing, brass we'll call it, and it's throwing it out of the gun. In this case, it comes out and to the right. It then, as it moves forward, strips the next round off the top of the magazine, which is inserted in the gun, and chambers it so it's ready to fire again. It is not something where you have to put one round in at a time. As long as there are rounds in the magazine and you're pressing the trigger, it will fire until all rounds have been fired.
But you do have to pull the trigger each time you fire the gun.
It is. It is only one shot per trigger press.
And you explained that it has a 15-round magazine. Is it possible to have 16 bullets in the handgun?
It is. It's the exact same for the FBI weapons. We have magazines which hold 15 rounds, but we always have a round in the chamber. So as we walk around, as in what is possible with the 59, 40, I'll call it 43, is that you could have 15 rounds in the magazine and 1 round in the chamber. So you are carrying 16 rounds in that gun.
And do you know whether the 5943 from Smith & Wesson is a double action only handgun?
It is. And the definition of double action versus single action in very basic terms, a double action only pistol, every time that I press the trigger to the rear, it is going to feel the same for me every single time. As I press the trigger, there's a part of the gun called the hammer that goes to the rear. At some point, I have pulled it far enough, the hammer's released, it goes forward, and that causes the gun to fire. Every single trigger press on a double action pistol, such as in this case, will feel the same. And in this case, we measured it was about 8.1 pounds. So you have to press 8.1 pounds with your finger on that trigger to get the gun to fire. The difference between that and a double action, single action pistol is Some of them, it is the long 8-pound trigger press on the first one, but then that hammer stays cocked after every shot. So it's a lot lighter trigger press on all subsequent shots. That was not what occurred with this particular handgun. It was double action, so all of the trigger presses would have felt the same from the 1st through the 16th if there were 16 rounds in the weapon. In addition to that, they would all be very close to 8.1 pounds, somewhere in that range.
In your review in this case, did you have occasion to review some squad videos?
Yes, sir, we did.
And was your purpose there to try to identify evidence of when shots were fired?
Correct.
And did you come across some difficulties in your analysis of when shots were fired?
We did. As I reviewed the video, there were some things in the video that made it more challenging to determine when the sequence of events took place. One of those was, as the gun is out, there is a light bar from a police car behind it. As we review videos of shootings, there are a number of things we look for to help us figure out when the first shot was fired. One of those will be the recoil of the gun and watching it come back. Because when we fire them, there is a moment where that slide comes to the back and it's discharging the brass and loading the next round, that we'd be able to see that. And that slide, and we sometimes can even see brass coming out of the gun if the video is of such quality. The other thing we look for is muzzle flash. As additional propellant comes out the front of the gun, you can see what is nothing more than a bright flash, and that's a flame. Some cartridges have a lot more than others, but from time to time you can see that. Because of the position of the light bar behind the pistol, but we weren't able to see any of that.
And then is there also a portion where the shooter is out of frame?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Towards the end.
And
Yes, sir.
so obviously you're not going to see any of that
Can't see anything.
during that portion of the video.
Correct.
Was there another difficulty that you encountered as it related to sound?
In the absence of any sound, that would obviously be the easiest indicator for us listening for when the shots kicked off, because they're going to be very, very loud.
And so that would have told you almost exactly when the shots were fired.
We could have timed the sequence between the first shot, the last shot, and told you what the time gaps were between each and every shot.
But you didn't have that information available to you.
Correct, sir.
Despite those difficulties, were you able to find visual evidence of shots fired on the video?
But there are, I'll talk about 3 things that existed there. One of them is when people change their physical behavior, that may be an indication of a shot being fired. And whether that was the individual walking down the street, or whether that was, in one case, I believe, an officer who would be, we looked at the dash cam video to the left, people flinching when shots go off. And I want to expand on that for a second. At our facility, we do live fire demonstrations, shooting test shots in front of audiences. And I have literally had hundreds of those in my 7 years. If one of our test personnel fires a shot and somebody in the audience wasn't ready for it, as I watch the audience, as I would watch you, you'll see people flinch when that shot goes off. It's loud, and quite frankly, at times it's painful if you're close enough to it. So there's a piece in this where it appears, I see what is consistent with what I've seen in our audience of a person flinch when a shot goes off.
And I think you started to talk about other reactions.
There are, if someone's walking, such as in this case, what appears to be straight line down the street, and then their body contorts and changes significantly, that could also be indicative of someone receiving a gunshot.
And that movement would be consistent with what you've seen and studied?
It is, yes. With watching a variety of other videos of shootings, that is not at all uncommon to see people change what was I'll call a normal pattern of behavior to something totally different.
And was there another thing that you could pick out as visual evidence of shots fired?
There is, and that was the third piece of this. What you can see, and again, some of them you really have to look very closely to see it. You will see, people call them puffs of smoke on the ground. That's not really what that is. What that is the projectile as it's traveling, they're coming out very fast. As they go and they strike the ground, they're literally causing some of that hard surface to abrade or scratch. And it's dust, and at times it can be actually fragments of the bullet that breaks apart. And you will see those, let's call them plumes. You'll see those plumes come up. And that is absolutely consistent with what we have seen before of bullets impacting a hard surface.
And that's essentially debris, right? Is what
It
you're
is,
seeing.
yes, it's debris. It's not smoke from a fire, it's debris of sorts.
And in your review and work on this case, did you have occasion to review a video that had arrows on it?
I have, yes, sir.
Okay. And we need to be very clear about what those arrows represent. So what are those arrows showing?
So the arrows were put into one of the videos to help draw people's attention to what we identified as the events. What I think is very important about that, a couple of those events that will be highlighted by that video come later. They're hard to see. You need to have a good television screen, but the arrow is telling you, look in this area to see the next event. I don't want you to think the arrows indicate anything about bullet path or any significance of direction. The arrows are just showing you where an event is occurring so you can look for it yourself.
So it's essentially saying, look here.
That's all it's saying is look in this area.
And because some of these occur very quickly, correct?
They do, and they're varying degrees too. Some of those plumes are extremely easy to see, and some of them, quite frankly, are a little bit more challenging to see.
And in your review of the video, do the arrows accurately point to events that you have identified as visual evidence of shots fired?
Yes, sir.
And would those arrows help you in your testimony and help the jurors in determining where that visual evidence is?
They are absolutely helpful for that if you're not familiar with what you're looking at. Absolutely.
Judge, at this time, I would ask to publish a portion of People's Exhibit 8, which was moved into evidence.
Certainly, go ahead.
Mr. Patterson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this portion of the video all the way through one time, and then we'll talk about some of the aspects of it.
Yes, sir.
And Judge, for the record, I'm starting People's Exhibit number 8 at 2 minutes and 3 seconds on the timer. Your Honor, I'm stopping it at 2 minutes and 41 seconds. And just as a point of clarification, Mr. Patterson, it's your understanding that the timer on the bottom is in seconds, and then that last, after the last semicolon, it's however, whatever the number is out of 30 frames per second, correct?
That's my understanding, yes,
So
sir.
it's not hundredths of a second, it would be, so what's on the screen now would be 1 minute, 5 seconds, and 1/30th of a second.
Yes, sir.
And based on your review of this video with the timer and the arrows, were you able to determine that the first visual evidence of shot fired occurred at about 41 seconds and 24/30ths of a second?
Yes, sir.
And that would be about 41.8 seconds if it's.
Yes, 41.8.
And were you also able to determine that the subject hits the ground approximately 1.6 seconds after that?
Yeah, correct. It's 1.6 is very close to the number. I think it's 156, but 1.6.
Additionally, were you able to determine that the last visual evidence of shots fired was 12.6 seconds after the individual struck the ground?
Correct. After the individual is on the ground, 12.6 seconds later is the last visual indicator that we found.
And approximately how long is it from first visual evidence of shots fired to last visual evidence of shots fired?
14.2 seconds.
And so we are talking about visual evidence of shots fired, correct?
Correct.
Is it possible that shots were fired after the last visible evidence of shots fired?
It is possible.
And how could that occur?
In this picture we have here, if bullets are entering the individual's body and not exiting, we would not have any way to determine if and when those were occurring.
Because they never hit the hard surface to kick up the debris.
Correct. And you can't see the shooter either. That's a challenge in that.
Okay. And are you able to definitively tell whether a projectile impact on the hard pavement actually struck the individual?
I am not.
Okay, and why is that?
One, I haven't seen anything that would indicate the bullet paths into the individual or what the subsequent fragments which were inside the individual, what they looked like.
But it is possible that each of those traveled through the individual and then struck the pavement.
Correct. Yeah, bullets don't, even the bullets that the FBI selects for our personnel, it is absolutely possible that when we shoot our adversaries, that bullets pass through them and come out and could strike, and I'll use this as an example, we could also strike the ground behind our adversary after they've passed through an individual.
Your Honor, with your permission, I'd ask to replay the video and stop it at a couple points.
Certainly, go ahead.
Mr. Patterson, do you see the three reactions that you talked about as visual evidence of shots fired, of the first shot fired?
We do.
Okay.
Obviously, the two arrows are indicative of the ones that you can see on the screen. The far right arrow oriented in the far right lane of traffic is that type of plume consistent with a bullet striking the ground. And then the individual's behavior has changed from just proceeding down the street in the manner that he was to this position. The one that is not marked with an arrow, I don't know if you can back it up just a bit. Look at the second officer on the left, whose arms are now kind of 45 degrees down. His arms are up and vertical at this point, or horizontal at this point.
Would you like me to play it?
Please play it. And then watch his change of behavior, the officer on the left. That response, that let's call it flinching, is consistent with what I have seen a number of people do at our facility when they weren't ready for a projectile or a cartridge to be fired.
I'm going to continue playing the video. Actually, I'm going to back it up a little bit. Mr. Patterson, I've stopped the video at 44 and 3/30ths of a second. There's two arrows directing attention to something in this shot, correct?
Correct.
Is that consistent with one or two shots?
I believe it's consistent with two.
And can you explain why?
If you can back it up and play it just for just a brief second, you can see that the plumes will appear at slightly different times.
Mr. Wiley,
Yes.
you heard when the special agent said, just back it up a little bit.
It's a little harder than it looks, Judge, but I will try.
All right, you will do it.
I will do it. Okay. And
So the plumes appear, but it's very rapid succession.
Again, now stopping the video at 53 seconds and 13/30, did you see visual evidence of a shot fired there?
Yes, sir, there was another plume.
Okay. And I think that you indicated earlier that the plumes can sort of vary in how easy they are to identify.
They are, yes, sir,
Is this one of the more difficult ones?
it is,
But you still see that visual evidence?
yes.
And is there a reason or reasons why they may be more difficult to perceive on the video?
So there are two factors that can affect that as we look at this video. The first one is part of the plume being consumed by clothing? Is the clothing overlay the area where the bullet's impacting the ground and we're not getting the full attributes of the plume vertical? The other one can be bullets come out, and I will use this number just as a general number, 1,000 feet per second. As that bullet transitions through a human being, it is losing velocity. It is not maintaining 1,000 feet per second as it travels through. It's meeting resistance. It's interacting with clothing, bones, fluids inside the body. And then as it exits, it's going to be traveling markedly slower. That number depends greatly on what structures inside the body a projectile can strike. So there's no real way to guess, but they cannot maintain the same velocity when they exit a body as they have when they enter. It's going to slow down. So as the projectile would then have traveled through a part of the body, whatever that was, and as it strikes the ground, that will change the effect of that plume because they've lost so much of their velocity.
And I just want to see if this is a fair characterization. Is it possible that some of these plumes just hit concrete?
Absolutely.
Is it also possible that some of these plumes went through LaPont McDonald and then hit concrete?
Absolutely.
Is it also possible that some of these plumes hit concrete and then went into LaPont McDonald?
Yes, sir, it is.
So essentially there's three scenarios.
Correct.
Now stopping at 54 and 9/30 of a second. Do you see another visual evidence of shot fired there?
I did. It's very, very hard on this particular screen to see it. We were using just computer laptop screens and other monitors, so it's very important how you view this later so that you can fully see it. But there is another small plume in that area.
But you are confident that there is visual evidence of a shot fired at
I
that
am.
point?
Yes, sir.
And again, at 56 and 9/30 of a second, is there another visual evidence of shots fired?
Yeah, that one is one that's significantly easier to see than the previous one as it moves vertical.
And I believe that was the last visual evidence of shots fired, correct?
I believe it is, yes, sir.
Did you also conduct a demonstration to indicate and give an idea of different rates of fire?
We were asked to conduct a rate of fire demonstration in our facility for this.
Okay. And so just to be clear, this was not to recreate the exact rate of fire that was in this case, but it's to give an idea of what different rates of fire look like, correct?
Yeah, and sound like.
And in that demonstration regarding rate of fire, did you use a Smith & Wesson 594?
We did. We used a 594 model. Our finish was different, so the last number was different. But in terms of being a appropriate surrogate for a standard Model 59 double action gun, it's the exact same.
So it's comparing apples to apples.
It is absolutely.
And could you describe sort of the setup of this demonstration? And I'm talking about shooter 1 and 2 only.
So what you'll see in these videos, you will hear I'm the one speaking on it. You will see one of our shooters standing there facing downrange, which will be to the right in the image. And we have an FBI cardboard QIT target. It's our qualification target. It has a little human outline inside the rectangle. You will see that mounted approximately 10.6 feet away from our shooters. We picked that number because if you look in the video, there is a solid double line that runs down the middle of the street. The line to the right, which divides the lane, an individual from our Chicago office measured it's about 10.6 feet in width. And that's a rough estimate. It's very close to the outset of this event. So we took and we tried to replicate that to the degree we could at our facility. You'll hear me say, I believe it's shooter ready, and then you'll hear a loud beep. I'm going to explain what that is. That beep is a handheld timer. It's called, in this case, a pack timer, P-A-C-T. The timers are specifically designed so that we can determine when shots are fired and at what rate they're fired. It, in essence, feels every shot fired, and it can time it. So we can tell how long it took to fire the first shot, the time between the first shot and the second shot, and how much time it took you to fire all 16 shots. We have used them widely in the FBI for many years, and it's a common tool to time shots. And that's what that beep is. You will hear me announce the time at the end of the shot string in seconds, and that's me reading what the pack timer told me was when the last shot took place.
And was one of the individuals that you, and so what did you have the individuals do?
One of the things that we had to make sure we preserved in this assessment is if we allowed our shooters to just pull the trigger as fast as they could with no requirement for accuracy, you can pull the trigger faster and fire more shots more quickly. But when you put a requirement of accuracy, that is, we want you to account for where they go and hit what you're aiming at, that slows our rate of fire down. One of the controls that we put on this experiment was, or this demonstration rather, was to ensure that you put all of your shots as quickly as you could in one case, and in another case in a controlled cadence inside that target. You weren't allowed to fire wildly and just shoot it as quickly as you could. So we had accuracy as a requirement in this.
Can I ask you this? Were your targets moving at all?
They were not moving.
So those were stationary targets.
They were.
And did you have a demonstration with a master class shooter?
And I'll explain that. You'll see this individual. He is a firearms instructor for the FBI. At the time that we did this, he had been a firearms instructor for 13 years. He was a U.S. Marine for many years before that. He is a competition shooter. And what I mean by that is he spends his weekends traveling around to different shooting events. He would be one of the top 1% shooters in all of the FBI. He is a professional shooter, and that's the best way to put it. He is extraordinarily skilled with handguns, and it would be hard for me to find anywhere in the FBI a shooter who could have fired that gun more quickly or more accurately than that of what he executed for us. He fires between 20 and 30,000 rounds per year. As a measure of that, our typical FBI agent fires 1,000 rounds per year.
And so that was one demonstration, was him trying to fire as quickly with a degree of accuracy as he could.
That was one of them.
Okay, and that's 16 shots, correct?
Yes, we had the gun with a round in the chamber and 15 rounds in the magazine.
And did you also have an agent do, under the same circumstances, attempt to fire 16 shots within 14.2 seconds?
And I think the boundary we gave this other shooter was fire at a cadence to where you fire all 16 shots between 14 and 15 seconds. I believe he ended up at 14.1 seconds at the end of that.
Could it be 14.19 even?
Yeah, 19, yes, sir.
And so very close.
Yeah, it was remarkably close for just having set up a gun at once.
And have you reviewed both of those rate of fire videos?
Yes, sir, I have.
And do they accurately depict those demonstrations?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move people 6 and 7 into evidence and ask that the identification marks be stricken. Those are the two rate of fire videos.
No objection.
Thank you. They will, the identification on both of those exhibits will be stricken, and they will be moved into evidence, and you will be allowed to publish.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Shooter ready? Stand by. Last shot was 3.77 seconds. 3.77.
Okay. And so does that demonstrate that he was able to fire all 16 shots in 3.77 seconds?
It does.
Okay. And again, that's at a distance of 10 and a half feet?
Yeah, 10 feet, 6 inches.
Okay. And again, it's a stationary target.
Correct.
And if my math is correct, if you divide that, that's about 4.2 shots per second.
It is correct, for about 4.2 frames.
And so giving him the benefit of the doubt, in a second and a half, that would be about 7 shots?
Yes, sir, it would be.
And before I get to the second video, how would you describe that rate of fire?
it's exceptionally fast. That would be hard for us to replicate with most personnel that we have, to include our higher level shooters. Again, he is by competition rating a master class shooter. That's an extremely high level.
And so up on the screen is the second video that you talked about, correct?
Yes, sir. This is the one where he was given a time parameter of 14 to 15 seconds to fire all 16 shots.
I'll play that video now.
Shooter ready? Stand by. Last shot was 14.19.
And how would you describe that rate of fire?
It's a deliberate rate of fire. It's methodical. He was taking the time to aim each shot. It was deliberate, methodical are the best ways to describe that.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we're just going to take a 5-minute recess.
All right, for the jury.
Will everybody please be seated? Thank you. Special Agent Patterson, you're still under oath. Okay, cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Patterson.
Morning, sir.
How are you?
Good.
You just were shown 2 videos that you created, and you gave those videos to the government, and that was what was entered into evidence today, correct?
Yes, sir.
And those regard the case of shooting for 2 individuals,
Yes, sir.
and one was done in 3.77 seconds, I believe.
Yes, sir.
That was by the expert shooter.
Yes, sir.
And then the other one was done over a period of 14.2 seconds, correct?
Essentially, yes, sir.
And you would agree with me that shooting over the course of 16 rounds for 14.2 seconds, that is not typical for law enforcement to shoot, correct?
The rate of fire, sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir, correct.
In fact, the shots are quick, correct?
They can be very quick.
Rapid.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And certainly your evidence actually showed that these shots were fired in rapid successions, the ones that you can see, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you also produced 2 other videos for 2 different shooters, shooter 3 and 4, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you provided those videos to the government with videos 1 and 2, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you produced those in the same manner that you produced the videos 1 and 2 that you've already testified to, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember shooter number 4?
Yes.
And that was, correct me if I'm wrong, that was a shooter from the FBI that had 4 years of experience, correct?
I believe that's correct.
And in fact, you chose shooter number 4 because that shooter most resembled Jason Van Dyke as far as firearms ability.
I can't make that comparison because I don't know his firearm ability.
Okay, well, somebody made the decision that they compared shooter number 4 as the closest out of the shooters 1 through 4, the closest to the skill level of Jason Van Dyke.
Objection to someone?
Well, let Mr. Patterson answer. I'll go over that this time.
So we selected a shooter that was a baseline law enforcement shooter with no competition shooting, no other specialized training, a baseline shooter.
Okay, and if I told you that Jason Van Dyke is a baseline shooter, he would most align with shooter number 4.
Overruled, they can ask questions about, this is an expert opinion, so they certainly can ask different scenarios.
Remember?
Would you repeat that for me? I want to make sure I get your.
Sure. Actually, I'll withdraw the motion. Let's talk about shooter number 4.
Yes, sir.
Shooter number 4, in your experiment, fired all 16 rounds, correct?
Yes, sir.
And shooter number 4, in your experiment, fired those rounds in 5.67 seconds.
I believe that's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd like to show, Your Honor, we'll mark it as defendant's exhibit number 6. And this is the shooter number 4 video produced by the witness. You remember taking this video?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, and that's what we talked about. This is shooter number 4, an agent with just average firearm abilities that fired this weapon 16 times in 5.67 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, at this point, I'd like to strike those identification marks and enter those into evidence.
Any objection?
Did we object to the entry of the markings?
It's discretion how evidence comes in. If that's your only objection, overruled, they will be admitted into evidence and the identification marks.
Yes, let the record reflect that that was played with no sound.
The record will so reflect.
Thank you.
I think we can turn the lights back on. Thank you very much. Okay, so Mr. Patterson, you talk about how you fire, I think you said like 80,000 rounds a year.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's not uncommon, or I should say, it's common that those rounds are fired in rapid succession, correct?
At times, absolutely.
Okay, and in fact, you fired your weapon thousands of times in rapid succession, correct?
Correct.
And how long does it take you to fire 16 rounds?
Not very long. I don't know what the time seconds would be, but and depending on weapon, the weapons change that too. So some guns I can shoot a lot faster than others.
Okay, you're better than that 5.67 seconds, I'm assuming.
I think I would have beaten him.
Okay, you would agree with me that when you're firing your weapon to empty your clip, to fire 16 as fast as you can.
I'm just a point of clarification. Mr. Herbert used the word clip. Are those interchangeable now? And is there a difference between a clip and a magazine?
We would define them differently, yes, sir. So these are magazines in these weapons.
And when you use the terminology clip, you mean magazine?
I do.
Thank you.
I'll try to use magazine though. You would agree with me that when you're firing your weapon at that rapid rate of speed, you are not thinking consciously about each single trigger pull, correct?
Correct.
It's one thought, to fire and shoot 16 rounds as fast as you can, right?
If that's what I'm trying to do, absolutely.
In the video that you looked at to put those arrows on there, you indicated that you had difficulty properly analyzing that video.
Yes, sir.
You couldn't see the shooter's hands because of the light bars.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and it was also 30 frames per second, right?
Correct.
And 30 frames per second is not very good quality. You would agree with me on that?
It's certainly not very fast.
Okay. And in fact, it actually misses certain portions of the event because of its limited frame capacity.
Objection, Judge, outside the scope of his expertise.
Do you understand the question? Rephrase that.
Sure.
Thank you.
At 30 frames per second, you would agree with me that the video does not capture everything that is happening in an event.
I hesitate to answer that because I don't know, quite frankly, that I'm qualified to tell you what would be missed versus 30 versus 60 frames.
I'm not asking for numbers. It's pretty hard to come up with that. But my point is, some portions of the event are not captured on a 30 frame per second video. You would agree with me on that?
Correct. Yes, sir.
And your colleagues have testified the same thing. So I would, you would agree with me that this video, because of the limitations, such as the 30 frames per second, the light bar blocking the shooting cans, no audio, the video that you looked at, it does not properly reflect what the scene actually looked like.
It reflects accurately what we can see in that. Other events, I have no idea what occurred.
Sure. But it doesn't reflect what transpired. Other than what you see in the video, you would agree with me that that does not capture the full event that somebody would be experiencing if they were out there.
Do you understand the question?
I do understand the question. I don't know how I can qualify what segments are missing.
Okay, that's fine,
Yeah.
because there's multiple segments missing, correct?
Objection. Misstates his testimony.
Go ahead and move on, Mr.
Okay. You analyzed when you believed shots began being fired by Mr. Van Dyke, and you did that based upon what you characterized as a flinch of his partner, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I believe you said that you analyzed the video and determined that shots were striking or struck LaQuan McDonald at the point in which he torqued his body, correct?
I did not say shot struck him. I said that his behavior changed, which is consistent with when projectiles would strike people.
Okay, so fair to say you certainly don't know for sure that LaQuan McDonald torqued because he was shot, correct?
Correct. I do not know that.
You that's right. In those arrows that were shown, you said that those arrows, the ones with the puffs of smoke, that was from the bullet striking the pavement, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it may have, your analysis didn't show that those bullets struck LaQuan McDonald and then the pavement, correct?
Correct. Don't know that.
And it doesn't show that it struck the pavement and then entered LaQuan McDonald, correct?
Yes, sir.
So it's fairly likely then that those bullets never struck LaQuan McDonald.
Again, I have no idea.
Okay. You would agree with me that the video that you reviewed, it shows LaQuan McDonald on the ground,
Yes, sir.
and it shows LaQuan McDonald holding a knife.
I believe it does. Yes, sir.
And while on the ground and while holding the knife, it shows LaQuan McDonald moving.
Yeah, a part of that does. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you have no evidence to believe that LaQuan McDonald was moving because he was being shot at that point, correct?
I don't, sir. Yes, sir.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Mr. Wiley?
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Patterson, you were showing another rate of fire demonstration during cross-examination.
Yes, sir.
And that was actually a slower rate of fire than the expert that we showed, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so if that is in fact the skill level of the officer, that officer would only, giving him again every benefit of the doubt, it would be more like 6 shots in the 1.5 seconds, right? Because it was 5.67 seconds for 16 shots, and that's 2.8 shots a second.
Correct. So that's close. Yes, sir.
And the expert was shown because that gives him the benefit of exceptional experience, correct, and skill?
Yes.
Defense counsel asked you some questions about what may be missing in the video.
Yes, sir.
You recall those?
I do.
The video was of sufficient quality that you could track puffs of debris, correct?
Correct.
And that occurs very, very quickly, correct?
Correct.
If a pathologist testified that 16 separate bullets struck LaQuan McDonald during this incident,
Objection.
would you then
I haven't heard the question. Go ahead.
would you then be able to say that each of the bullets either ricocheted into LaQuan McDonald or went through LaQuan McDonald?
Objection.
Overruled, the number of bullets are in evidence. Go ahead. You can answer if you can.
Yes and no. Yes, and that if you have 16 definitive
All right, I'm sorry, that's fine. Yes and no, it doesn't clarify anything. Move on.
And are the LaQuan McDonald's movements while he's on the ground, are those consistent with being hit with bullets?
They could be, yes.
And so that wouldn't be inconsistent with what you would see somebody being shot in the ground move like.
I have seen other videos where people move when they receive an impact from a projectile, yes.
In a similar fashion.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
State, could you call your next witness, please?
Yes, Your Honor, the people will call Yuri Patrick.
Watch your step, remain standing, face the clerk.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this honorable court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Have a seat. The seat is adjustable. The microphone's live, so pull your seat up to the microphone, please. Speak into the microphone. Everybody will be able to hear your testimony, and it would be greatly appreciated. State when you're ready. Proceed, please.
Yes, Judge, we're just setting up
I'm
our
ready.
computer.
I'm ready.
Well, we're not the state.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excellent.
Sir, would you please state your first and last name and spell both for us?
My first name is Yuri, U-R-E-Y, last name Patrick, P-A-T-R-I-C-K.
And sir, can you tell us what your occupation is currently?
I'm self-employed as an expert witness and law enforcement consultant.
And do you specialize in anything with your self-employment?
Primarily use of force issues as well as weapon and ammunition matters, but predominantly use of force.
Can you tell us what your educational background is, please?
I had 4 years of college, graduated from Princeton University in 1968, 1 year of law school at American University, and no additional education beyond that.
And have you ever served in the military?
I have. I was in the U.S. Navy from 1968 to 1972.
And what was the highest rank you achieved in the United
Lieutenant.
States Navy?
Lieutenant,
And were you honorably discharged?
I was.
What did you do after you left the United States Navy?
I took employment as an aide to the mayor of the city of Jacksonville. While concurrently, I had applied for admission to the FBI, and I worked for the mayor for roughly 7 months until my application with the FBI was accepted and I was hired by the FBI.
Can you tell us when you worked for the FBI?
I entered on duty in April of 1973, and I retired in January of 1997.
And during your tenure with the FBI, can you tell us what your duties were?
From 73 until I'm trying to get it straight in my mind. For about 2 years, to about January of 75, I was assigned to the Atlanta field office, working general criminal matters, fugitives, bank robberies, thefts from interstate shipment. In January of 75, I was transferred to the Washington field office in the District of Columbia, where I worked, again, general criminal matters, reactive crimes, bank robberies, kidnappings, and spent my last several years there on the fugitive squad. In January of 1980, I was transferred to the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia, where I was employed as a full-time instructor in the firearms training unit.
Can you tell us what your duties were when you were a trainer in the firearms unit for the FBI?
We provided basic firearms training, advanced firearms training, specialized training to like SWAT teams, for example, to both new agents, new agent trainees, senior agents, field agents, and police officers around the country. We would conduct regular police schools where we would go out, conduct a 2-week school on a regional basis under the aegis of the local FBI office, and plus police schools back at Quantico.
And during, I'm
I'm sorry.
sorry, during those trainings, sir, with firearms, did that include, you said you indicated that you also trained police officers as well, is that correct?
Yes,
Did that include the use of force and deadly force during those trainings?
yes, use of force training was integral with a lot of the the advanced firearms training we did. We would do not so much with the basic firearms where we're just teaching people how to shoot, but and the follow-on training where we're teaching them not so much how to shoot, but when to shoot and under what circumstances.
And when you say you taught individuals not so much how to shoot, but also when to shoot and under what circumstances, can you tell us about that particular type of training that you conducted?
Well, it was varied. We used live fire, we used simulation, what we call simulated ammunition and blanks with role players. We used computer simulations. We used a wide variety of means to try to put individual officers and agents in positions of stress and similar to what they might experience in a personal confrontation, to try to give them training and experience in exercising judgment, assessing risk and making sound decisions under very stressful and difficult conditions. We can't actually simulate shooting incidents because they frown on you when you shoot trainees. But we tried to get as close to that stress level as we could without actually hurting anyone.
And how long did you conduct those trainings with officers and agents, training them on
With the
sound judgment?
FBI, I did that work for about 13 years. And then my last 2 years at the academy, I went to the National Academy Unit as a director of admissions. And then subsequently after retirement, I've been doing that same training primarily in the state of Maine, under the aegis of the State Attorney General's office and through the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, which is the central law enforcement training institution for the entire state of Maine.
And how long did you do that training, officer training in the use of force and deadly force for the state of Maine?
From roughly 2000 to 2015, so almost 15 years.
And during your training of officers regarding the use of deadly force, how many officers would you say you have supervised or trained in that area during your experience?
Thousands in one capacity or another, but the total number would be several thousand at least.
And in training those officers, have you also served as a consultant on use of deadly force?
I have been consultant and expert witness around the country.
And how long have you served as an expert witness consultant in the use of deadly force around the country?
I need to break it up slightly. I functioned in that role for the FBI on a couple of cases during my time at the Firearms Training Unit when we had some FBI shootings that ended up in court, and I was the government's expert witness. There's some adversarial actions taken against some agents for making poor shots or poor decisions under pressure. They were fired and then appealed, and I was the government's expert witness in those cases. That was a couple of instances. Then on my own, since retiring, I've been performing that function since 1999, summer of 99 to present.
And when you say you've consulted as an expert in the area of the use of deadly force, have you previously been qualified as an expert in the area of the use of deadly force?
Yes.
Have you testified in jurisdictions within the United States as a use of force expert?
Yes, I have.
can you tell us how many times you have been previously qualified as a use of force expert in deadly force?
Gonna estimate roughly 10 to 12 cases that have gone to trial, perhaps a couple more.
And in what jurisdictions were you qualified to testify as an expert in the use of deadly force?
Pennsylvania, New York, Alaska, California, Arizona, Texas, Florida, Michigan, Connecticut. And I'm sure that, I think there's gotten, I'm not sure, but there would be a couple, three more, I'm not sure.
And in addition to testifying in courts, have you also been consulted and given depositions regarding your expertise as a use of force expert?